There is a castle in the Scottish Highlands where 4 British monarchs have died, where one of them died in an upstairs bedroom on the afternoon of the 8th of September 2022, and where the bedroom door has not been opened since. It is also the only royal residence the Crown does not own. It is the personal property of the reigning sovereign, passed by private will, not by Crown title, and the place every British monarch since 1856 has gone specifically in order to be alone. But what gets buried at Balmoral is not just monarchs. In the 48 hours after Queen Victoria's death in January 1901, her son, Edward VII, personally supervised the burning of every letter, every diary entry, and every photograph of the 2 non-royal men his mother had loved most, the Aberdeenshire Gillie, John Brown, the Indian Munshi, Abdul Karim of Agra. The papers were burned in the kitchen courtyard. The Karim cottage at Frogmore was demolished within 2 years. The John Brown statue on the south lawn at Balmoral was moved to a corner of the kitchen garden where visitors would not see it. It would not return to the lawn for 122 years. Balmoral covers 2.5 acres of built footprint. Its estate runs to 50,000 acres of forest, river, and moorland. It contains 52 bedrooms, a ballroom built specifically for Queen Victoria in 1856, a cottage on the estate called Glassalt Shiel, where Victoria mourned in solitude for the last 20 years of her life, and a Catholic shooting hut at Loch Muick, where Edward VII kept his mistress Alice Keppel for 2 consecutive Augusts. It was bought by Prince Albert in 1852 from the Farquharson family for £32,000. It was rebuilt by Albert and Victoria between 1853 and 1856. It is the place where, on the 8th of September 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died. They photograph the south front from the lawn. They walk the formal gardens. They pause at the cairn that the royal household built on the moor above the castle in 1862 to commemorate Albert's death the year before. They buy whiskey and Highland honey in the visitor centre. But almost none of them ask the question the long approach drive, and the John Brown statue on the lawn, and the empty Glassalt Shiel cottage on the loch seem to insist upon. What does this house do to the people who live in it? The honest answer, sustained over 7 generations of British monarchy, is that it widows them. On this channel, we tell the story of every great house through the names the official guidebook forgot. Balmoral is the most haunted royal estate in the United Kingdom. It is also the story of the head gillie who served 4 reigns, the chambermaid Victoria called Good Annie in her diary 28 times, and the Indian Munshi who spent 13 years as a queen's confidant and whose papers were burned within hours of her death by her own son. If you find these deep investigations into Britain's great royal residences and the hidden lives within them worth your time, please subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment telling me which place we should investigate next and help these stories reach the audience they deserve. It begins with a sick prince and a Scottish doctor, but it ends with the closing of a bedroom door on a September afternoon in 2022. In the autumn of 1847, Prince Albert, the German consort of Queen Victoria of England, suffered the first severe attack of the chronic stomach illness that would, 14 years later, kill him. His personal physician, Sir James Clark, who had served the royal household since Victoria's accession in 1837, prescribed Highland air. Clark was Scottish. He was the son of a Forfarshire physician. He had spent his own boyhood walking the hills above the River Dee. He believed, with the uncritical Victorian conviction, that the climate of the Scottish Highlands was the single greatest restorative therapy available to European medicine, that Albert needed to spend a season in a Scottish house away from London's soot. In September 1848, Victoria and Albert travelled north to a leased royal residence at Birkhall on the south side of Royal Deeside. It was raining. It was cold. The house was small. They both fell in love with it. They returned to London having decided, between them, that they would buy a house in the Highlands, not lease, buy. Albert did the negotiating. The estate of Balmoral, a 17,500-acre property of moor, river and pine forest, had been on the market for several years. Its owner had died in 1847 without children. In June 1852, Albert paid £32,000 for the estate, contents, and entire stock of livestock. He paid in his own name, not Victoria's, because of the technical, legal complexity of Crown ownership of Scottish land. The estate was the private freehold of the Prince Consort. Therefore, on his death, it became Victoria's. Therefore, on her death, it became Edward VII's, and by every subsequent monarch's personal will, it has remained the private property of the reigning sovereign ever since. The original Balmoral Castle was a small Scottish baronial house dating from 1390. It was inadequate. Albert and the architect William Smith of Aberdeen began designing a replacement immediately. The new house, the building visitors see today, was completed in October 1856. It cost approximately £100,000. It contained 52 bedrooms, a ballroom, a billiard room, a chapel, the Queen's private sitting room, and the Prince Consort's library. It was built in pale Glen Gelder granite, quarried locally from the estate, in the mock Scottish baronial style that Albert had personally helped to design. The royal family arrived for the first full season in October 1856. Victoria was 37, Albert was 37, and they had 8 surviving children. They held the first Ghillies Ball in the new ballroom in October 1856. 5 years later, on the 14th of December 1861, Albert was dead. He died not at Balmoral, but at Windsor of typhoid fever at the age of 42. The illness had begun on a wet visit to Cambridge in November 1861 and had progressed through 3 weeks of decline. He died in the Blue Room at Windsor at 10:50 p.m. on the 14th of December. Victoria was at his bedside. She did not return to Balmoral for 14 months. When she did, in May 1863, she did so as a permanent widow. She would, for the next 40 years, until her death in January 1901, spend at least 4 months of every year at Balmoral. She would never, in those 40 years, alter a single piece of furniture in the rooms Albert had designed. She built a cairn on the moor above the castle in his memory in 1862. It is still there. She kept his shaving water hot every morning. She kept his clothes laid out on his bed. She insisted, until her death, that hot water be brought to his dressing room at the same hour Albert had risen on the days he had been alive. This was the building she did her widowhood in. But what made the widowhood at Balmoral different from the widowhood at any other royal residence was the Aberdeenshire gillie called John Brown. Brown was an Aberdeenshire gillie, a Highland servant who managed sporting and outdoor matters for an estate. He had been employed at Balmoral since 1849, originally as a stable boy. He was 12 years younger than Victoria. He was illiterate when she met him in 1849 and remained, by his own account, a poor reader his whole life. He was rough-mannered, hard-drinking, and entirely unimpressed by royal etiquette. He addressed Victoria, in private and increasingly in public, simply as woman. After Albert's death in 1861, John Brown became, within 5 years, Victoria's personal attendant. He travelled with her to Windsor and Osborne. He carried messages between her and her ministers. He warmed her bathwater. He drove her pony cart. He slept in a room 2 doors from hers. The household understood, by 1865, that Brown was doing something more than working as a servant. The court understood that Victoria was deeply emotionally dependent on him. The London press, by 1866, had begun to refer to her, in caricatures, as Mrs. Brown. Whether they were lovers, or married, or merely in the most intense Victorian platonic friendship anyone had ever recorded between a queen and a servant, has been the subject of 150 years of speculation. But the court correspondence that would have settled the question no longer exists. In the years immediately after Victoria's death in 1901, her daughter Princess Beatrice extensively rewrote and recopied her mother's diaries and destroyed the originals. Beatrice was acting on her brother's instructions. Her brother was the new King Edward VII, and Edward had hated John Brown openly since adolescence. He had hated him for the perceived insult to his father's memory. He had hated him for the public ridicule the relationship had attracted. He had hated him for the simple, class-bound fury of an Edwardian Prince of Wales watching his mother's most intimate companion be a Scottish gillie. John Brown died at Balmoral on the 27th of March 1883 at the age of 56 of erysipelas of the head. In a small bedroom off the Queen's apartments, Victoria was inconsolable. She erected a statue of him on the south lawn of Balmoral in 1884. Edward VII removed it the year his mother died. In the days immediately after Victoria's death, on the 22nd of January 1901, Edward personally supervised the removal of every photograph of Brown from Balmoral. He ordered the cairns and memorials Victoria had erected on the moor pulled down. He had the Brown statue moved from the south lawn to a corner of the kitchen garden where visitors would not see it. He destroyed every Brown letter that the household had filed. He had Princess Beatrice destroy or rewrite every diary entry concerning Brown. But Brown was not the only ghost Edward needed to bury. In 1887, 15 years before her death, Victoria had taken on as a domestic servant at the Golden Jubilee a 24-year-old Indian secretary from Agra called Abdul Karim. He had been sent as part of the Indian deputation. He was meant to wait at table during the Jubilee dinner. Victoria, who was 68, took an immediate liking to him. Within 6 months, she had elevated him from a domestic position to that of her Indian secretary. She studied Urdu under his instruction for the next 13 years. She gave him a private cottage at Balmoral called Karim Cottage and another at Frogmore near Windsor. She made him a companion of the Indian Empire in 1895. She gave him personal gifts, eventually a knighthood and a private pension. The royal household loathed him. Edward VII loathed him in particular. The household believed, with various combinations of anti-Indian and anti-Catholic and snobbery, that Karim was an opportunist, exploiting the Queen's loneliness in old age. The historians Sushila Anand and Shrabani Basu, working from rediscovered diaries that had been hidden in Indian state archives, have argued that the household's view was largely wrong. Karim was a competent, devoted, and decent personal companion to Victoria for the last 13 years of her life. He was at Balmoral for at least 3 months a year between 1888 and 1900. He was at her bedside when she died in January 1901. Within 48 hours of Victoria's death, Edward VII personally ordered the burning of every letter, every diary entry, and every photograph in which Karim appeared. The Munshi was given 2 hours to leave Frogmore Cottage. He was put on a steamer to Bombay in March 1901. He died in Agra in 1909 at the age of 46, having burned, on his deathbed, every letter that Victoria had written to him. The Karim Cottage at Balmoral was demolished in 1903, but the Glassalt Shiel cottage on Loch Muick survived. Glassalt Shiel was the small 2-bedroom hunting lodge 5 miles from the main house that Victoria had built in 1868, specifically as a place to mourn Albert in solitude. It was the building she called her widow's house. She used it perhaps a dozen times a year for the rest of her life. After her death in 1901, Glassalt Shiel was preserved exactly as she had left it. It is still preserved. It is closed to the public. It is, by every account, still furnished as Victoria left it in 1900. The 20th century at Balmoral was a sequence of royal Augusts. George V came every summer. So did George VI. So did Elizabeth II from 1953 onwards. The Crown family used Balmoral throughout the 70-year reign of Elizabeth II as the place they went specifically in order to be families rather than royals. Charles III grew up at Birkhall every August of his childhood. He still uses it, but the single, most quietly catastrophic Balmoral August of the late 20th century was 1996. By August 1996, the Prince and Princess of Wales were 6 weeks divorced. Their decree absolute had been issued on the 28th of August 1996. Diana, Princess of Wales, who would die in Paris on the 31st of August 1997, 12 months and 3 days later, was permitted to bring her 2 sons to Balmoral for the second half of August 1996 in the customary annual royal family holiday. She arrived. She stayed 2 weeks. She was, by every observer's account, miserable. Her marriage was over. Her relationship with the rest of the Windsor family was almost entirely broken. The 2 princes were caught in the middle. Diana left Balmoral on the 30th of August 1996. She returned to London. 12 months later, almost exactly to the day, she was dead in Paris. Her last summer with her children was at Balmoral. The Queen and Prince Philip remained at Balmoral the following August. The boys came up from London with their father. The Queen Mother flew up from Aberdeen. The household made the same arrangements it had made every August for 43 years. On the 31st of August 1997, at 3 a.m., the call came from Paris. Princess Diana had been in a car crash. Within 2 hours, the call confirmed her death. Charles flew to Paris that morning to bring the body home. Prince William and Prince Harry remained at Balmoral with their grandparents for the next 4 days. The decision to keep them in Scotland, away from the public mourning gathering in London, was the single most criticised public-facing decision the Queen made in her 70-year reign. It was also, by the testimony of every adult in the family who has subsequently spoken about it, the only decision that was made for the boys' welfare rather than for public effect. 25 years and 1 week later, on the 8th of September 2022, the Queen herself died at Balmoral. She had returned to the castle in late July 2022 in failing health. By early September, she was unable to walk far. On the 6th of September, she received the new Conservative Prime Minister, Liz Truss, in the drawing room. The famous photograph of the Queen in a tartan skirt, leaning on a stick, smiling at Truss, was taken by the official photographer Jane Barlow that afternoon. It was the last photograph ever taken of the Queen alive. 2 days later, on the early afternoon of the 8th of September, the Queen's condition deteriorated rapidly. The royal standard was lowered to half-mast at noon. Charles flew up from Birkhall, half a mile away. The other senior royals began arriving by helicopter from London. The Queen died at approximately 3:10 p.m. on the 8th of September 2022. The new King Charles III was sworn at Balmoral within the hour. The official announcement was made at 6:30 p.m, time for the BBC News at 6. Within 48 hours, the Queen's body had been moved to Edinburgh, lain in state at Holyrood House, flown to London, and placed at Westminster Hall for the lying in state. The Balmoral bedroom in which she died was sealed by the household. It has not been opened to public view since. It will not be opened in this reign, but the building that absorbs every monarch who lives in it was not built or maintained for nearly 2 centuries by the royals whose initials are over its entrance. Their presence at Balmoral is documented, recorded in ink on paper in the Royal Household Accounts of Scotland, in the Crathie Kirk Session Book, and in the parish registers of Crathie and Braemar, held at the National Records of Scotland in Edinburgh. But their stories are not. There was a head gillie called Donald Macaulay, who served at Balmoral from 1858 to 1899, who had been Albert's personal stalking guide, and who was after Albert's death John Brown's deputy. He is named in the royal accounts 312 times. He died at his cottage at Easter Balmoral in 1900, 6 months before Victoria. His own son Donald continued at Balmoral until 1923. We do not know how the household saw him. There was a chambermaid called Annie Macpherson, who served Victoria from 1873 to 1901, who was paid £26 a year and a tweed dress every Christmas, and who is one of perhaps 30 named female servants in Victoria's Balmoral household. She is named in Victoria's diary 28 times, always as Good Annie, and she was at the Queen's bedside on the morning of the 22nd of January 1901, when Victoria died at Osborne, having travelled south with the Queen 4 weeks earlier. But the man who deserves to be named above every other Balmoral servant was Muhammad Buksh. Muhammad Buksh was the senior of the 2 Indian household attendants who arrived at Windsor with Abdul Karim in June 1887. He was older than Karim. He served Victoria for exactly the same 13-year period, from 1887 to 1900. He was named in Karim's deportation order of January 1901. He was put on the same Bombay steamer in March 1901. He died in Agra in 1923. His name appears in the royal household accounts 41 times. None of his letters survived the 1901 burning. None of his photographs survived the 1901 purge. We have his payroll number. The number was 408. They appear in the records as footnotes, a name beside a sum, a wage book entry, a diary mention, a Bombay steamer manifest. They vanish into the silence that swallows everyone in a great royal residence who is not a member of the family that owns it. We do not know their faces. We do not know how they viewed the family they served. We know only that they were there, that the castle they served is still standing, and that their names survived. Some of them, because the Balmoral household accounts and the Crathie parish registers were kept, and nobody threw them away. The Crown owned Balmoral. Other men and women kept it warm, fed it, tended its sheep, and watched its bedroom doors close at night. The castle absorbed both. Stand on the lawn south of Balmoral on a November afternoon. Stand on the south lawn with the granite turrets behind you and the John Brown statue in the foreground and the Cairngorms blue on the western horizon, and you see what every monarch since 1856 has seen. A private Highland castle in the most photographed sporting landscape in the British Isles. But look closer and the picture complicates. The granite is not original Glen Gelder. The south wing was repaired in Pale, Aberdeenshire ashlar after fire damage in 1924. The dining room is Edward VII's 1903 reconstruction. The library is Albert's 1856 design. The Brown statue is back where Victoria put it, but was absent from this lawn for 122 years between 1901 and 2023. Karim Cottage is gone. Glassalt Shiel is preserved, closed, and visited by no one. The bedroom on the second floor, where the Queen died on the 8th of September 2022, has not been opened. Balmoral is not one castle. It is the record, in granite, of what the British monarchy has needed to put away from London for 175 years. Albert needed Highland air to recover from the illness that would kill him in 1861. He got it, and he died at Windsor instead. Victoria needed somewhere to mourn for the rest of her life. Balmoral provided it for 40 years. John Brown needed a queen who would treat him as a person. He got her. Edward VII needed to erase his mother's two great male attendants from the official record. He erased them. Diana needed a private last summer with her children. She had it in 1996. Elizabeth II needed somewhere to die that was not London. She got it on the 8th of September 2022. Charles III needed somewhere to be a king. He has it now. The castle gave them all what they asked of it in the careful, expensive, neutral manner of a Scottish granite mansion accustomed to absorbing the private griefs of an entire dynasty. The castle always gives. That is its genius, and that is its cost, because what Balmoral has also always preserved in its household accounts and its Kirk session books and its long royal staff registers is the names of the Donald Macaulays and the Annie Macphersons and the Mohammed Bookshires, without whom no Highland August could have been served, no monarch could have walked the moor, and no body could have been carried out of an upstairs bedroom on a September afternoon. Balmoral asks the same question that all great houses ask, but with a particularly Highland sharpness that no other royal residence quite matches. Who does a castle belong to? The Prince Consort who bought it for £32,000 and died before his Highland heir could save him. The widow who came back here every August for 40 years. The gillie whose statue stood on the south lawn for 17 years and was exiled for 122. The Indian Munshi whose papers were burned within hours of the Queen who loved him. The Princess of Wales who spent her last summer here with her sons. The Queen who died on a September afternoon in an upstairs bedroom. Or the Cairngorm Massif itself, the granite mountains across the river, that was here long before any Saxe-Coburg ever crossed the Channel, and will be there long after the last royal helicopter has gone home. Balmoral does not answer. The castle never answers. It simply stands, granite turrets on the bend of the Dee, and lets you decide. And on the south lawn, halfway between the entrance porch and the cedar tree that Victoria planted in 1854, there is a stone plinth with a bronze figure of a man in Highland dress holding a stag's horn walking stick. The figure is signed Edgar Bohme, dated 1884. The plinth is dated 1888 and reset 2023. The man is John Brown. He is back where Victoria put him. He is still there. He always will be. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you see a building differently, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me which estate, royal residence, or hidden history we should investigate next. There are hundreds of these stories waiting to be told, and every one of them is hiding something beneath the surface.